It's 1952, and you've just been put on trial for murder. Your so-called jury of your peers is a group of middle-aged white men. You're judged the same. You are a 43-year-old black woman who killed the beloved town doctor. Behind the scenes, though, he was much more sinister than he appeared. This is the story of Ruby McCollum. Like the other episodes in this series, she is yet another case of a minority who was a victim of our failed justice system. I'm Nilani Evans.
I'm Alicia Lamontry.
Welcome to Law versus Justice, your one-stop shop for information when the American legal system fails to protect the minority citizens it swore to protect.
The setting is Live Oak, Florida in 1950. Dr. Adams is Ruby's family practitioner. He was responsible for taking care of her, her two kids, and her husband. While her husband and Dr. Adams' wife are away, Dr. Adams ends up blackmailing Ruby. Being a black woman in the 1950s, Ruby did not have the legal system on her side. With that, we believe that out of fear, Ruby agreed to such terms as Dr. Adams had to offer. As a black woman, having barely any rights in the period, it would have been difficult, nay, impossible, for Ruby to say no to him. With the consequences of being beaten, or worse, lynched for lying, she had no choice. Soon, they start to have unprotected sex, and with the consequences of unprotected sex leads to, unfortunately for Ruby, she ends up in a scenario she wouldn't have ever thought could have happened to her. She is now pregnant with her rapist's child.
As a result of her pregnancy, Ruby was in excruciating pain. On a certain day in December, Ruby went to Dr. Adams to get painkillers. Dr. Adams wasn't in the mood to give her painkillers, so instead, he offered to have more unprotected intercourse with her. Ruby felt brave and told him no. This resulted in Dr. Adams assaulting Ruby and soon pulling out a gun to threaten her into submission. With Ruby's quick thinking, she decided to fight Dr. Adams for the gun, resulting in a struggle over it and shortly into Ruby's hands. With this opportunity, Ruby decided to shoot Dr. Adams out of a fight-or-flight response. After being caught for her crimes, she was obviously put onto trial. With how bad racial discrimination was back then, Ruby's trial was very biased toward the white man who was widely known to have violent tendencies. Especially given that in Florida, the KKK was in charge of the law of the land, Ruby's trial was not just. On numerous occasions, the judge excluded evidence that would have allowed her to explain the extenuating circumstances that led to her taking Adam's life.
In most of the articles written about the trial of Ruby McCollum, it is clearly understood that the court refused to allow Ruby to articulate her own story. The white supremacist-run area was hell-bent on preventing the press from speaking to Ruby on anything regarding the case. They feared that outsiders to the state would think that they were doing something wrong in terms of the court proceedings, that by allowing the press to speak directly to Ruby, the press would be able to find out and publish information that showed that the court was clearly skewing the proceedings to not allow Ruby to have a fair trial. They believed that by giving a Ruby a fair trial, she would be exonerated of all charges. It is crystal clear that the judge, the jury, and the white town convicted her of her crimes before she was able to explain her side of the story. This case highlights the injustices still prevalent in the legal system, and how because of her race and her gender, her fate was sealed far before the bang of the gavel. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of Law vs. Justice, the McCollum Case Files. This week's episode was written and researched by both Lonnie and I, and it was edited by me, Alicia. Thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you learned something, and make sure to tune in to our next episode whenever Miss Mystery assigns us another podcast assignment. Have a great day. Thanks for listening.